Have you connected with Jason Meyer yet?
On Twitter, we haven't actually. This is interesting hearing myself like this, but we're connected on Twitter. We haven't actually spoken yet though, but a couple people have kind of put us in contact with each other and just said, hey, like you should, but we haven't had a conversation yet.
I think he's going to get better and better. I mean, for a first interview, he did very well.
Agreed.
And observing him on Twitter has been interesting because he's getting like 1 in 10 shitty comments, like typical weak attempts at attacking a progressive, and he's not rising to the bait, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I get a fair amount of that type of blowback as well, and I think initially, you want to respond to every single person and kind of wage this war with them, but then you just arrive at a point where you say this is completely useless almost. So,
well, you're giving energy to people who won't change their mind.
Yeah, so much of it is, I feel like, baiting too. So, I mean, I wrote a couple of pieces about my intellectual journey going from being a Bernie Sanders supporter to being a Bitcoiner, and how being a Bitcoiner has changed the way I think about politics a lot, and sort of made, I guess, my view a little bit more nuanced about progressive stuff. And, I had so many people come out and just say, you lost me. You lost me at Bernie. Basically, you said Bernie and I'm out, and you can't possibly have anything intelligent to say.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also pretty naive in that you're trying to tell somebody a journey you've gone on to get into Bitcoin. And as a Bitcoiner, that's helpful for them to understand, unless they spend their entire life only mixing with people of the exact same attitude. One of the interesting things about, say, a journey that you've had, if they have friends who are maybe progressives who don't understand Bitcoin, or maybe Bernie fans, you can say, oh, well, read this, understand how Logan built his new mental model around Bitcoin. It's like last night we were out with some friends, and I had a friend who just fully doesn't grok Bitcoin, very smart guy, doesn't have, for us, he has not great arguments. And for us, I enjoyed it because I was like, okay, how do we get through to him? How do we navigate his objections to Bitcoin and give him the understanding of what, how we see Bitcoin? And I think this is why I've been saying to people about Jason and supporting him. It's like, even if you completely disagree with him politically, you should absolutely support what he's doing, because you want Bitcoin to be a success. You believe it's for everybody. We have a lot of pretty bad FUD or misreporting that comes from the left. Here's a guy going out there to defend Bitcoin and show progressives how they're wrong. You should absolutely support this guy.
Yeah, and I agree with your take on that entirely, 100%. Yeah, because I mean, I think even myself, I have some, not reservations, I guess I feel a little bit of mixed feelings. I have some ambivalence about the framing and the way that we kind of sort of try to bring the capital P progressives on board to Bitcoin. But nevertheless, I think it's certainly something we should be doing.
What do you mean by capital P progressives?
So I'm sure that there's probably a more eloquent way to that we can kind of make this distinction. But recently I've been thinking a lot about, and I think it helps sort of, at least in my mind, kind of clarify for me why I think progressives struggle a little bit with Bitcoin, is because I've been kind of drawing a distinction recently between what I would call lower P progressivism, which is obviously just progressivism with just a lowercase p, and then kind of capital P progressives. Capital P progressives, that's kind of like the formal political identification, the affinity with that political party, versus progressivism with the lower P, which in my mind is like a set of ideas that would just be lowercase p progressive, kind of detached from and not necessarily married to a specific formal political affiliation. And I view sort of lowercase p progressivism as that's kind of ideas first. Ideas lead the bus, or drive the bus, and kind of the identity part of it is more secondary or tertiary. Whereas capital P progressives, that to me, particularly in US politics where we're so polarized, the two-party system is very kind of entrenched and ossified. For me, I think of capital P progressives as it's kind of identity first. It's sort of you're identifying with this group, and you are not necessarily doing, diligence on every issue that exists. You're kind of just saying, okay, well, what is this identity group's lens? And, I'm going to view it through that lens, which then allows for people like kind of Elizabeth Warren to come out and say, here's what I think about Bitcoin. And then you have everybody who associates or affiliates themselves with that formal political group, immediately says, "Oh, well, then that's what I think about it." And so I think I've been thinking a lot about this, distinguishing between the two, because I think Bitcoin is very lowercase p progressive. I think it's kind of inarguably lowercase p progressive. I'm going to try to stop saying lowercase and capital, but
the distinction is helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful because I think one of the most interesting things that Bitcoin does politically is it's sort of like truth serum. It kind of reveals the incoherence of a slate of political platform beliefs. It also reveals, maybe internal contradictions in that set of beliefs. I mean, for example, with progressives, progressives purportedly believe in a certain set of things, a certain set of ideas. If Bitcoin advances those ideas and progressives are anti-Bitcoin, then Bitcoin kind of has revealed contradictions in the progressive platform.
Well, what is virtue and what is real?
So yeah, I mean, it's, how much of capital P progressives is just kind of more of like reflexive identity, like I want to be of this group of people, versus I actually care about getting the issue right, getting the solutions correct. And I also don't think, I don't think the incentives are always there, at least in US politics, but probably in politics worldwide, to actually arrive at a solution. I think the incentives, clearly in America at least, are get reelected and score points with your political team.
Yeah, well, this is why I find it so interesting at the moment, because I think it's pretty clear the history of Bitcoin was, post cypherpunks was very much a libertarian idea, and seemed to fit nicely within the political framework of conservatives, not just American conservatives, but also British conservatives. I historically have been a conservative voter, but UK conservatives are not like Republican conservatives. We also have and share some progressive ideas. Both our parties are a lot more to the center than I think US parties are. And it's very easy for us to get people on the show, libertarians or people with conservative ideas, and we've had a lot of that. But we've also had people writing in or leaving comments saying, your show is just filled with white right-wing libertarians. So like, can we have some more diverse opinions? And that's why I put the shout out. It's like, we've had Troy Cross on, we've had Margot Baez on, and we knew we were going to have Jason on, and I put the call out, say, let's have some more. Let's unite around this. Let's see where we agree, and let's see where we can work together. So you are responding and agreeing to come all the way over to Bedford, which, by the way, thank you so much, because it's not a small journey, and also we're going to treat you to a game of football. But thank you for coming over to this, because there is some pushback against this when I talk about this and push Jason out there or other people out there. There is some pushback. And I really want to get the idea to people is that we are in this really shitty culture war at the moment. And we have this thing that we agree on and we can unite around, and we can possibly solve a number of societal problems which are unique to our own identities, but help bring us together as society. So I really do appreciate you coming over and doing this. And I hope to talk to a few more progressives about their ideas and what they're thinking and what Bitcoin means to them. And also, both parts of your From Bernie to Bitcoin was brilliant. And we're going to cover a lot of that today. But I think it might be useful just for people who don't know you. Can you just introduce yourself? Because there's quite a big audience now who might not have heard of you. Or...
Sure, yeah. So I'm currently a lawyer by day. That's my day job. Back in the day, I was a high school teacher. I've been practicing law for, I guess, 5 years or so now. I got into Bitcoin in 2017. Originally, didn't stick with me. I kind of needed multiple touch points, like I think most people do. And 2020 rolls around, and that's kind of where I went deep down the rabbit hole. Just a lot of things didn't make sense to me, and Bitcoin helped me make sense of the world and make sense of what was happening. And then it's just been a journey from there, just kind of getting deeper and deeper into the space and talking to lots of people, started writing a lot. And I write a free newsletter now called Think Bitcoin. And now I'm here.
Well, it's good to have you here.
And thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it, and very excited about the football game later.
I'm nervous and excited. We got off to a great start, perfect start to the season, but
we're going to bring a lot of good energy. So,
well, I hope so. Fingers crossed that you'll be our good omen and we'll get 3 points. But okay, so I want to get to. I want us to work our way to where you got to. I'm gonna quote you. This comes from the end of your part one of your two articles, which again I said we'll share in the show notes. But the first major breakthrough for me on my journey from Bernie to Bitcoin was confronting the idea of trust in politics and wondering how Bitcoin's trustlessness could be leveraged towards a positive political end via its potential to constrain lawmakers. So I've read that quote now probably about 10 times this morning. I'm going over and over and over it in my head. And then I went back and read your analogy with doctors and cures. And then it started to resonate with me. And because Danny was saying, oh, you're really going to love Logan. You two are going to agree on a lot. And I think I know where I agree with you is that I don't buy any of this burn down the state. I don't buy anarchism. It's not for me. But I appreciate a lot of their ideas. I do like the idea of a smaller state. And I do like the idea of better responsibility within the state. And I like how Bitcoin can do that. So that really crystallized it for me. But I think if we work through that journey, like literally talk the audience through from Bernie to Bitcoin, I think we might help some other people crystallize what the problems are and how Bitcoin can, because I don't want to burn things down. I want to make things better.
Yeah.
I don't want to say democracy is a terrible system and it should be replaced with something else. I think it can be the best system. I don't want to say great, the best system. And it's better than a lot of the other systems people are living under. So how do we fix that and make it better?
Yeah, I would agree. I definitely agree with that. And I think something that I think about a lot with respect to libertarians and Bitcoin and sort of the worldview that I think exists, the folks who kind of think that, oh, we need to burn down the state. There's actually I'm probably going to get torched for saying this maybe from both sides, but I actually think there's some similarities philosophically between some folks on the left and libertarians, in the sense that I think there's a streak of utopianism that kind of runs through both. And for example, if you were a Marxist on the left, and you believe that there's this natural kind of progression of history from feudalism to capitalism, and then of course naturally the workers get fed up and they rebel against unfair conditions, and then we get the worker state of socialism. And then eventually, though, it all culminates in this kind of, Edenic, perfect, state of communism, which is utopian. I mean, that's a utopian view that we get there, and I think it ignores a lot. It sounds wonderful in theory, and I think it's really alluring, but it obviously ignores a lot of variables. And I think for libertarians, though, I think there's, and some of the folks in Bitcoin who want to burn down the state and live in this kind of anarcho-capitalistic sort of state of nature thing. Or I guess maybe some of the folks who I think now kind of the version of that exists on the libertarian side of Bitcoin is, we're all going to live on our own farms, and, the world is going to be just one big sort of organic, farm, and we're all going to sort of live these bucolic lives.
Voluntary interactions.
Yeah. And I think, I've seen a lot of stuff on that, and I think that's similarly utopian and similarly probably, I hesitate to use the word naive because it sounds so pejorative, but I do think it's similarly ignores a lot of other variables. And I think, so I guess I think that there's some resonance between sort of the left's vision of the future and the libertarian's vision of the future that just doesn't get talked about enough. Because I think some of the pitfalls of both are similar as well.
Yeah, I largely agree, and we will both get flamed for this.
Totally.
But what I've come to appreciate is that when I spend time with libertarians, I think they have people on the left, people on the right, all seem to have anyone who cares so much about the system that we live within, they all seem to have a strong moral compass. They just have different things that they care about. I think libertarians are ideologically right about a vast number of subjects. I think the practical application of their ideas is where I struggle with it. But that's why I wish there was, I've said this so many times on the show, I wish the libertarian parties were better politically, more successful politically, because I think they could deliver a number of the things that, especially things that you've talked about in here, that a bit more constraint on the state, a bit more responsibility in terms of fiscal planning, and so I like and I support, and I just hope we see. I just think a more libertarian influence on politics would be good.
Yeah, I agree, and I like your framing that you just saying. I think in theory and kind of ideologically there are some similarities between the left and libertarians, but like you said, it's the practical applications. I think there are problems with the practical applications from both sides, both from the left and from libertarians. So I like that, and I also think, I definitely agree that it would be useful in America. One of the biggest problems that we have, in my opinion, is, we're extraordinarily polarized politically. The two-party system, I think, is, to put it charitably, untenable and dysfunctional.
Did you see that recent chart that came out on the voting patterns over the years?
Where it just kind of all converges and it hardens basically on each side now. Yeah.
Check out, I think it was Breedlove who shared it. I could be wrong, Danny. Try and have a look for this chart. But I think it was going back for like the 60s and 70s. There was it was less partisan. And now it's just like two solid blocks. Yeah,
there was kind of a middle ground that you could walk. Or at least there used to be. But now it's a total kind of sorting process where you're either on one side, you're on the other side, and it's like that for every single issue, which is why Bitcoin is so interesting in the way that it
was. It this?
Yeah, yeah, It's fascinating, but it's also scary.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and I think the incentive structure for politicians in the U.S. is just to kind of get reelected first and foremost, because we have no term limits. So I mean, there's nothing to constrain politicians from serving, decades at a time, which is why the average age of an American senator is 65 years old.
Well, it's to get elected and get paid.
Yeah, get elected, get paid, and then just stay elected. And then in order to do that, I mean, you just kind of have to score the right points with your political team, your tribe. And there's less of an incentive to actually get the solutions correct or to find the right answer, which is, I think sometimes when we, want to sort of pitch Bitcoin to either political party, I think there's sort of inherent within that the presupposition that, well, if we just educate them, they'll want to do the right thing based on their knowledge. And I'm not sure that I think that that's 100% correct, because I think the incentive system is so poor that I wouldn't be confident saying that, sure, if we educated every person in Congress in America about Bitcoin, that they would all, see the light and see this as, a solution to certain problems, and start advancing it and proposing and passing appropriate legislation.
Yeah, I'm trying to find one of your I think you quoted Ambrose Bierce. Have I pronounced that correctly?
You have.
And this is, I think, the problem with what you said is a strife of interests masquerading as a contest of principles.
Yes, I think that pretty much sums up American politics. Yeah,
it did give me hope though when Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand actually came together and put forward a bill, and that's the promise of Bitcoin, is to unite.
Yeah, and
that kind of gave me a bit of hope, because we don't have the polarization that you have here in the UK. I mean, we have intense debates in Parliament, but there are things that parties unite on. There wasn't a massive polarization around COVID. The shadow cabinet pretty much supported the government with their decisions. We don't need to debate whether it was right or wrong. I think we're way past that. But and they would challenge the government on their decision, but they largely supported. There is no difference on Ukraine. Both parties are kind of largely agreed, but will challenge on ideas and policy. We don't have that political division, and I've often wrestled with why don't we have it. I actually think it comes down to the media.
I really think that. like politicians go on media here, like they'll go on the BBC and they'll be really challenged on either side. And I don't think you have that as much in the US. Like politicians stick to their, like Republicans will go on Fox. Like I don't think they sort of challenge each other nearly the same.
It feels like in the US it's more like sports and teams, and you support your team. And if you go on Fox, it's a platform.
Yeah.
Whereas in the UK, I mean, people will argue the political bent of the BBC or Sky News, but they're still fairly down the middle at times, and they will speak to both parties and they will challenge them. And I think that's why we don't have as much polarization.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your point, Danny. And to that point, I saw a chart on Twitter the other day. It was about the reading level of the average American, and the comprehension level was of the average American. It was something around like a 6th or 7th grade reading level, which of course affects,
Wait, that's of the average American?
Yeah, it's the average American basically has, I mean, it was like a comprehension rate, like the ability to, I think the chart is from, I want to say Josh Wolf. I saw it retweeted by a different account, but basically just the point just being that I think the media is pretty well aware that, you're not, I mean, it's a pretty obvious point. You're not going to get the amount of clicks and eyeballs that are necessary to make money by writing nuanced, thoughtful, really sort of deeply researched, pieces on various issues and kind of working through them in a rigorous way. It's much more profitable, and it's going to just reach more viewers and sort of where they are in terms of comprehension ability to kind of just say inflammatory things. And
yeah,
I don't know if this is the thing that you were talking about, but it says here, yeah, reads at 7th, 8th grade level. Oh
yeah, it's a different chart, but yeah, similar.
Wow.
Which I think is really, really kind of scary.
There's a similar thing with the Sun. How the Sun, I mean, the Sun is an absolute shit rag tabloid here. Yeah. By the way, don't buy the Sun. But they have a reading age that they write for. I can't remember what it is.
Is that true? I've not heard that.
Yeah, they do. They have a set, like, and when you understand, it's maybe like 10 or 12-year-olds. Once you understand that and you read it, kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's what the chart was kind of getting at that I was referring to, is that people write to that, like the media writes to that level.
Well, it's why recently I've gone kind of full circle on the BBC. So the BBC is challenging in that it's kind of state funded. Okay, but it isn't like a Russian state news channel.
I mean, it's not funded by the state.
It's coordinated by the state, funded by the taxpayer.
Yeah.
It's not controlled by the government, but there's obviously influence. When I first discovered Bitcoin, I came to think, well, fuck the BBC. It's state managed, state controlled, state coordinated, whatever you want. We want fiercely independent journalism, yada yada. But actually, one of the things I've come to realize is that because it is state controlled, it has a duty to try and give a fair representation of all parties. They also have this onerous complaints procedures where if it's felt that it's not being independent, they have to investigate. And yes, it has its inherent flaws, but it also is a different way of being able to have the news represented to you than, say, something which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, which really is at the whims of what his objectives are. I mean, I don't think there is a perfect model. I think the best model now are independent journalists who are independently financed, who haven't been audience captured.
Yeah.
That's to me the best. But if you want to talk about mainstream, I think that there are benefits to being able to look at the news through multiple lenses. I will get flamed for this, but you defend it.
I definitely defend it. And I'd actually push back that independent journalists, whatever you want to call them, are a stronger source of truth. I think that's probably not true.
No, they can. And what I mean is that is not always, but they can be.
Yeah, I think maybe to Danny's point, it might be a matter of you can have kind of the cream of the crop of that, like the folks that you were saying, Pete. But there's also, because the barrier of entry for doing that is also so low that anybody can kind of just hop onto a Substack and do it, that exactly. you actually have an ocean of noise around these very these very strong voices that are I guess signal, but just the amount of noise that is present then is perhaps even greater.
And it's not that the BBC are flawless; they're certainly not. But I think there's some really good journalists and some really good work by a lot of organisations, not just the BBC.
Yeah, and there's some I'm a huge fan of John Simpson. I'm pretty sure he's head of news at the BBC. I wrote to him when I was a 7-year-old, and he wrote back to me. So I've always been a fan. But I'm a huge fan of his as a journalist and as a historical war reporter. I think he's one of the best. But then the BBC historically has some great reporters. It does have it does have to play to the crowd, the latest what is culturally acceptable. It definitely is a little bit more left than right. I think you would agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not far off being one of the most centrist outlets, but it probably does lean a little bit left. Yeah.
Slightly left of center. I wonder what the bias check websites would say about it. I'd say it's kind of left of center, but equally to the other side, you've got Sky News, which is kind of right of center. And Sky News as a Murdoch-owned entity is less propaganda promoting than, say, Fox News. So I think you can get a good balance between the two of those, as long as you've got a lot of common sense with avoiding their bullshit.
That's where they put it.
Yeah, so just left of center.
Yeah.
What does it say for Sky News?
Who fact checks these?
Who fact checkers? Who fact check the fact checkers? Yeah, so we're just looking at media bias fact check, and it's got BBC just left. Huh?
Interesting.
GB News must be the balance. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what in America would be considered only slightly left of center or only slightly right of center.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to look at Fox News now.
Because
look at that. And then...
so for anyone listening, Fox News is considered right almost to extreme.
Yeah, so the chart is least biased right center right extreme, or least biased left center left extreme, and it's right of right, so it's approaching extreme right. Factual reporting, it's stated as mixed. Actually, have a look at CNN. To be fair, I actually think these websites are pretty good.
I mean, it just gives you a bit of a lens. Yeah,
again, it's pretty much as CNN is also mixed on factual reporting.
It's a mirror image just to the left.
Guardian's definitely left.
Yeah, but that's very left. Yeah,
yeah.
That would be probably our most left wing outlet. Do you think in the UK?
Yeah, probably. And it still has some good reporting, but you have to
some terrible reporting on Bitcoin. Though.
Well, yeah, but it has some good reporting. But so what you notice there is somebody who travels back and forth between the US and the UK is I see this extreme polarization, and then you have these extreme biases in the news. And I find coming back here, we don't have this extreme polarization. The debate is a lot more civil, and I think people are a lot more willing to give up on certain ideas or concede. And I think our news is a lot more balanced. And I don't know how you solve that. I don't know. I mean, bring back the fairness doctrine or...
Yeah, I don't know. I think the media question is really thorny. I'm not sure I have any good solutions to that problem. I think just from the political angle, I mean, to me, an obvious thing that would help would just be introduce term limits.
Yeah.
I think that's a glaringly obvious. I don't think it solves everything. I don't think it's kind of a magic cure or a panacea or anything. But I do think anything that we can do to kind of reorient the incentive structure would be helpful. And I think term limits would certainly do some significant cleanup of some of the incentives that currently exist.
Is there any appetite for that?
There actually is. Interestingly enough, I think, maybe we could check this, but I'm pretty sure that both AOC and Ted Cruz, interestingly enough, I think they both agree on that. I want to say I kind of vaguely recall a tweet from Ted Cruz that was a quote tweet of AOC in which he said, I actually agree with you on this. Let's do something about it. I could be wrong, but I do think there's some appetite for it. Obviously not significant enough that we've had any meaningful traction on it thus far.
I think that one and the just a completely separate point, but the not allowing people in Congress to be trading in the stock market. I think that's another one that
also seems obvious. Yeah.
Shout out to Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah,
absolutely crushing it. We had a bit of a detour there, but yeah. So let's bring it back. So just tell a bit of the story. So you were a Bernie supporter. I don't mind Bernie. I tell you what I like about Bernie is consistency.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I still feel that way. I mean, I don't consider myself a Bernie Sanders, political supporter right now, but I certainly do. I have respect for Bernie, certainly for his consistency. He doesn't seem to me as compromised or as captured as most other politicians, which I very much appreciate. And I think Bernie has pretty much nailed he's kind of nailed the fact that obviously there is an enormous problem. I just think the solutions that I think he's treating the symptoms or trying to treat the symptoms instead of treating the source of the problem. But I do think he's kind of spot on that, kind of that we have this major issue around wealth inequality in America, among other things. So I think he's worth respecting for a number of reasons.
Yeah, his consistency was something. I mean, if I was American, I don't think I could vote for him, but I did like his consistency. He just seems to want to give too much away for free, like free education, for free health, and I admire it. Like as somebody who has a healthcare system here that is healthcare system for I think is great, but there seems to be a lot of things: free childcare, free healthcare, free education, like free higher education. There's a lot. Mm-hmm. Why is it like as somebody who doesn't fully understand politics? Why? My understanding is the DNC blocked him running, having the opportunity to become president. Is that true?
Oh, in 2016, the stuff with Hillary. Yeah, I mean, my understanding of the DNC, and I don't think this is a perfect understanding, but I mean, I know that it seemed obvious that the quote unquote establishment Democrats, their kind of desired candidate was obviously Hillary Clinton. My understanding of it is that there was certainly some behind closed doors, some kind of like an influence campaign to ensure that that this upstart Bernie Sanders that nobody kind of saw coming in 2016 when everybody thought Hillary was just going to cruise to the nomination, to kind of prevent him from from winning and taking it from Hillary at the end. But I'm not sure of all the details of what happened there. Yeah. I'm not sure I want to know all the details of what happened there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen. Let's get into this. I've taken a lot of quotes out from you, but let's talk about this trust idea. If you can kind of explain, because you said you had to, on part of your journey was confronting the idea of trust in politics, and that's something similar that I've had to do because here going into this Bitcoin world as somebody who vocally defends and champions democracy, that comes with certain criticisms. So. I've had to reflect that myself, and in reflecting that, I've realized actually there's a lot wrong with politics. Can you talk me about that journey you went on with us?
Sure. I think with respect to trust, for me personally, for the longest time, politically, my view, and I think a lot of people who would consider themselves liberal or Democrats or progressives or whatever version of that in the U.S. would probably agree that I always thought that it was a personnel issue, that if you could just get the right person, the right human being into office, that you could then trust, you could trust that person then to make all of the correct decisions or the decisions that were aligned with, the policies that you wanted to see enacted. And the deeper that I got into Bitcoin, when I started to sort of develop different opinions as to where I thought the source of a lot of our problems was and how most politicians were mislocating the source of the problems, it just started. And I think this, maybe if you're somebody who starts from a different political inclination or perspective, this might be more obvious to you from the outset. But it started to become very obvious to me that it's certainly a mistake, I think, to put all of your just trust into let's just change the personnel. And then one because, the personnel is always going to be changing. So, I mean, you could put, and this is kind of what goes on now is we put the Republicans go in for 4 or 8 years and they do some stuff. And then the Democrats come in, undo all that, do some stuff. The Republicans come in, and undo all that. And we just kind of keep, it's like putting blocks on the board and then taking them off. But also, I just think the this sort of surface area for human error to occur when it comes to policy, particularly monetary policy, is so expansive and so large that I think Bitcoin kind of shrinking that and making it so that you don't have to trust the decision making of human beings as much on at least this one particular issue of kind of the structure of the monetary system itself, I think is useful. It's a tool. I think I don't think it's a solution to everything, but I think it is potentially helpful. I mean, I got a lot of pushback from that. What's his name? Rohan Gray or whatever, the Willamette Law guy who was before Congress. I mean, he accused me of basically being a fascist or he said that I had taken a hard right turn, which I thought was interesting. So did my wife.
Why?
I think it's because, I mean, I know that there's some criticism as to from the left, I think, is if you basically remove the ability to manipulate the money, that, you remove the ability, basically you remove the rescue function, like the rescue button. If you take that button away, regardless of the long-term harm that using that button repeatedly over and over again and more frequently the harm that can cause long-term, that if you remove it altogether, it's, you're dooming people to bad outcomes ultimately.
Well, the rescue button has been abused.
Yes.
And the balance of surplus and deficits is now it's become just a case of deficit and more deficit. And I think that is one of the major issues, is that it's like, if it was a rescue button, if it was Katrina and we need to rebuild New Orleans, if it was COVID, and we're not debating the rights and wrongs of COVID, but if it was COVID, it was like, it should be there to support and rescue people at times of hardship. It's a rainy day fund. We all have it, but it's become a keep yourself elected fund.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. It's absolutely been overused. I think, I've been thinking about this a little bit as well. I do think there are probably ways to. I don't think the only way to step in and do, I guess, quote unquote, rescue stuff is the way that we've been doing it. I mean, I think that there are ways that you could have sort of money set aside, perhaps, and creative ways that you could have some resources available, or just be more prepared generally, such that you don't have to kind of hit the button the way that we've been doing it. So I don't know. I mean, I think people like Rohan or other people like him, would say that the only way that we can do this is the way that we've been doing it historically, which is just to kind of expand the money supply and helicopter money, stuff like that. But I'm confident that there are other more creative ways to, not allow or to be able to provide resources when it is necessary, that doesn't also necessarily involve, expanding the money supply, which is of course going to just
compound the problems.
Yeah, and make it worse.
Do you know Ovik Roy?
Yes, I do.
Did you listen to my show with him?
I did. That was a great show.
Yeah. So for someone like Rohan Gray, I would forward him Ovik's article and maybe Ovik's interview and say, I fully understand why you think you need this rescue button, but now you need to understand that this has a compounding impact on the people you think you're helping. And if you continually use this, you're going to continue to widen the wealth gap.
Yeah. I view the rescue button as kind of like, I think I've probably written this somewhere. I view it as kind of like it's like the painkiller way to address problems, where it's like, if I had a health issue and you just kind of pharmacologically intervened, that would alleviate my symptoms for a period of time, and I would probably feel better. But if you don't actually cure the disease or treat the bacteria, or you don't more holistically improve my lifestyle and my environment, such that I actually get healthier instead of just feel sick less, then you're not really solving the problem. And I think that you're just delaying it, and you're just sort of kicking the consequences down the road farther. And then, there's a much larger problem down the road that maybe the intervention required is obviously greater. And then we just, we all know where that ends. I think that's where my big pharma comparison that's kind of where I was thinking there.
Yeah, one of the things I was trying to wonder with politics, trying to fix the problem of, poor fiscal policy for poor monetary policy, would be to tie the use of the budget and the spend of the party to snap elections. So if you were to go over budget, you would be required to face a snap general election. And I may be trying to simplify something that shouldn't be simplified, but I think of it as both in terms of my company and my home life. I have a mortgage, I have bills to pay, I have food to buy, my set of bills, and then I earn money. And if I have extra money, I can go on holiday. And if I don't, my option is to get a loan, but I have to pay back that loan or I lose my house. Same with the business. I have staff to pay, costs to pay. If I want to expand the business, I take a loan. If I don't pay that back, I lose my business. If you offered me a loan facility, which I never have to pay back, and I can use whenever I want, I'm going to live in the best house. I'm going to get my football team in the Premier League, and I'm going to drive a Lamborghini. I mean, it's just, I can do that. And the problems with politicians is they have access to a infinite loan facility of which other people to pay the consequences much further down the line. So I would absolutely support a political system where the government has a budget, and if they go over their budget, they face a snap election, and we get to decide whether we want to continue with this. And it puts some responsibility on them, or maybe other ways. I think people need to face the consequences of overspending as a political party.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. There's a certain level of transparency, I think, monetarily, that we in our personal lives are able to exercise. You said in your personal life, in your business, it's all very transparent. You face those consequences immediately. I mean, if you don't have the money to pay Danny, Danny's probably going to let you know about it. If you default on your mortgage, and your bank's going to let you know about it, and there are kind of immediate consequences there. And I think, this is, Gladstein has written about this with respect to conflict and war and stuff like that, where if you just remove the accountability component, you remove the transparency, then you kind of you pay for anything, and there just isn't any. There's just a moral hazard there.
This is the choice between war bonds or money printing, right?
Right.
If you create the war bonds, we don't want to pay those war bonds.
Maybe not.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So it's very. I've got so many of your quotes. This one I wrote. Wow. I think mainly because of the length of the sentence as well. I want to read this one back to you. Let's see if I can do this without making a mistake. We should also be cognizant of the lasting, potentially irreversible harms that can be wrought by entrusting control over the money supply to the vicissitudes of short-sighted partisan manipulations and or hasty, ill-conceived, and sometimes dubiously motivated lawmaking undertaken by those whose knowledge of elementary monetary concepts is often not obviously more advanced than that of the average high school or undergraduate student. Apart from suggesting a bit more grammar, I fucking love that.
Yeah,
that is a takedown.
Well, I'm under strict instructions from my wife, Pete, to not be too long-winded today. So I'll try to put it in more concise terms.
Let's stop letting idiots make decisions about money.
Yes. Or I think the monetary system is so fundamental to everything, and I just think the incentive structure of politicians making these decisions is so bad that, and the issue is just so important that I think the motivations.
It kind of comes back to this, right?
Oh yeah.
This was a poll in 2017 that showed that 85% of MPs in the UK don't know where money comes from.
Let me read it. The results of the new poll of MPs reveal a worrying lack of understanding of the UK's money and banking system across the House of Commons. The poll finds that only 15% of MPs are aware of how most money is created in the modern economy. Only 15% of MPs were aware that new money is created when banks make loans, and existing money is destroyed when members of the public repay loans.
I would imagine this is probably similar in the U.S. as well. I mean, if you just listen to most politicians speak publicly about this sort of thing, it's pretty obvious that they're not spending a ton of time digging into that. But it's an issue that's so fundamentally important and has so many reverberations across every aspect of our lives, and especially looking long term. This is the type of thing that if done incorrectly, destroys societies entirely, historically speaking. And so I think entrusting that or we should at least be asking questions about the wisdom of entrusting that to human beings who are on this very kind of short-term cycle of just wanting to get reelected every 2 years, every 6 years, or every 4 years if you're the president, and whether the motivations of those individuals aligns with, long-term what we as citizens for ourselves, for our children, and for our grandchildren, how we would like to see things play out, and the world that we would like to live in, and the health and sustainability and of that world.
Well, this is where I'm going to probably contradict myself, because as somebody who supports democracy, I also recognize, as you have here, that we're entrusting really important decisions into people who have no experience in making some of these decisions, and the compound effect can be huge. Like, I mean, we've seen that with countries that have been destroyed, and lives have been destroyed through bad decisions. Sometimes just a few small bad decisions. We don't allow this with the engineering of aeroplanes or the piloting of aeroplanes.
Right.
We don't entrust people in terms of childcare who don't have experience in childcare. We want the people who understand what they're doing and all these fields of responsibility. But then in the area of politics, we sometimes are picking based on personality, less so experience. And then when you think about it, it's kind of strange. Like, how do we get more experienced people into these roles?
Yeah, I think it's really, it's kind of a complex problem. I think there's certainly an expertise issue. At the same time, I think I wrote about this a little bit too. I mean, I think the amount of topics that we expect our representatives to have a competent command of is kind of astronomical at this point. So, and I think the same is true for the executive branch, for the president as well, that the sheer amount of responsibilities and the amount of the different areas that we demand a certain level of competence and expertise is almost, it's kind of impossible. So I think if there are ways to, for lack of a better word, outsource some of those a little bit in order to kind of, like I said earlier, sort of reduce that surface area on which human error can kind of play and wreak havoc. I think it's worth asking the question of whether that would be something that would be useful. And I think Bitcoin is unique because it's not like you're offloading it or outsourcing it to a different group of people who are maybe similarly compromised or have their own set of issues. It's to a protocol that doesn't really have those issues, which is one of the things that I think makes Bitcoin so unique. I think the way that Bitcoin has all these interesting interplays with our current political system is just endlessly fascinating to me.
Well, it forces bottom-up thinking.
Yeah, I think it certainly does. And I think, just it sort of reveals this sort of, like I was saying earlier, the incoherence of the way that we currently think about politics. And I think it's our last best chance probably to, there are a lot of people who talk about wanting to transcend the two-party system. I know that Andrew Yang talks about that all the time now, and which I think is useful. But I think, like you were saying, you almost have to force that from the bottom up. You can't just implement that from the top down. Just say, hey, we're starting a third party, or a different. The sort of energy for that, and there needs to be a groundswell from the bottom. And I think that Bitcoin is probably, at least as in my lifetime, by far the most interesting and promising way to potentially do that. And I'm kind of the view where I'm not particularly optimistic about us solving a lot of major problems as long as we continue to be constrained by the two-party system as it currently exists. So anything that meaningfully challenges that, I think we should be spending time with and looking at. I think Bitcoin is that.
It's like Nick Carter said, it's like this peaceful revolution.
Exactly. And that's a great piece. And yeah, I would agree with that entirely.
I think we had Matthew Mashinsky in here today, a few days ago, and he's based out in Eastern Europe. He's American Latvian, and he wanted to talk a lot about what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. And one of the things that really stuck with me is his view and very much supporting sanctions and supporting the high levels of pressure that have been put on Russia, because it is a gangster state with a psychopathic dictator attacking a sovereign country. And he said the only way, one of the only ways that you will get change is if you can force for revolution within. And the only way Russians can do that is if they have the world closed to them because of the decisions by Putin. And that's the revolution there. Our revolution is this, we're just going to use a different form of money. We're going to adopt this and hopefully bring more and more people into it and have these fairer rules. And hopefully with that, we're kind of seeing the kind of, not so much in the UK, there's a couple of signals, but we're seeing the shoots of promise with politics in the US in that people have genuinely starting to care about Bitcoin. I know there's some who are just saying it because it's a hack, but there are some politicians who genuinely seem to care about Bitcoin and see the benefit it brings. So the shoots of promise, we're starting to see it.
Yeah, I definitely think there are some heartening signs. And I think, and I do think it's part of, I think politicians are incentivized kind of almost on a time lag, where you don't have as much incentive to kind of change your mind quickly. But, if you're sort of receiving, all kinds of, calls and interest from your constituents about something like, say, Bitcoin, then, that's when maybe you're more incentivized to take a look at it. But I think that occurs kind of on a lag because, it takes time for the general populace to get on board with Bitcoin as well, or to become just increasingly educated about Bitcoin. So I think there are heartening signs. I do think the Lummis Gillibrand thing is heartening. I think particularly for Gillibrand, there's more kind of risk for her because the FUD around Bitcoin is much more. I mean, if you're a Republican, the environmental FUD, you don't really care. So there's not really a lot of risk for you to be, yeah, sure, Bitcoin's great. But for somebody like Gillibrand, there's more risk there. So I applaud her for being willing to undertake that.
When you started thinking about how you've got to treat the root cause of the problem, that kind of flip you had, and how Bitcoin can do that, have you practically thought about the reality of that, what that actually means, and how integrated Bitcoin needs to become within the system? Do you see it as a check and a balance? Do you see it operating alongside the dollar? Do you think long-term it is the only form of money? Because they're some of the bigger, more interesting questions that I'm trying to work through at the moment. Because I'm not sure I see a world of just hyper-Bitcoinization where we have this single hard currency. I see we get to, well, certainly in my lifetime, and maybe a few lifetimes, we have both a hard and soft currency working together.
Yeah, I think I see it. I do think about this a lot, but and I'm not sure anybody ultimately knows how this is going to play out. But I agree with you that I think there will probably be a combination of hard and soft money, and I think that the hard money will kind of check the soft money. I think it does sort of operate in a checks and balances type of way, where basically if the soft money kind of goes off the rails, there will be kind of a check there, and currencies will fail if they sort of just go nuts. But it is admittedly difficult for me to envision a world where it is just Bitcoin. And maybe I am very much willing to admit I could absolutely be wrong there. I think everybody is speculating in terms of this discussion. But it is difficult. There, some of the hyper-Bitcoinization arguments to me are kind of utopian, and to me, and sort of at times so glaringly, obviously utopian as to be totally, willfully blind to, I think, a lot of other variables,
and possibly also take too many jumps at once.
Yes.
I mean, even if you're right, even if we have hyper-Bitcoinization, there's a lot of steps between now and then, and on that journey, there's implications for people of that happening. We don't know if it's currency collapses, and I wrestle with this. I wrestle with the implications of a transition to Bitcoin, and knowing there will be negative externalities to some people. It
Certainly.
may lead to a different type of wealth equality. It may lead to conflict. It may lead to quite a lot of mess. And I think it's important to think through these steps, not just allow these things, just wait and see what happens.
Yeah, and I agree. One of the things that actually kind of annoys me a lot, and I would expect to be torched for this as well, is some of the...
We're going to be burning down in flames when this comes out, you and I.
It's going to be bad.
It's been Danny's fault.
Well, I talked about the BBC, so I'm fucked.
Yeah, all fucked.
But I think so sometimes when you were saying, Pete, about like the leaps that get taken sort of all at once, I mean, I think when people say things, I wrote something about this a little while ago, but when people say things like, oh, it's just game theory, and just like, let's just assume that working under the assumption that Bitcoin is obviously going to take over the world and be the only currency, et cetera, and just kind of going from there and taking that as an actual unchallenged premise, I think is a little nuts. I mean, I think it reminds me of, because it is very kind of seductive in theory, and it's kind of an eloquent or elegant theory to say, oh, well, if this domino falls, then this one will, and it's just this game theory will just play out, and it works on paper. But again, so does Marx's theory of history, basically on paper. And people, they're students on college campuses right now who are basically saying, oh, well, soon there will be an uprising, and we'll all realize that capitalism doesn't work, and then we'll do this. I mean, that's not that far from what Bernie Sanders' campaign was, and it makes sense. It resonates a lot because there's a lot of truth in the diagnoses there. But as I think we saw with the Bernie Sanders campaign and its inability to ultimately win for a number of different reasons, there were a bunch of other variables that came into play there. And I also think for every country who's experimented with some version of socialism or communism or whatever, a lot of other variables, most of them very human variables, kind of come into play. And I think the same thing, why we wouldn't expect a road to quote unquote hyperbitcoinization to include similar variables, like not expecting those along the way, I think is naive, I guess, to put it probably charitably.
Do you obviously mix in different circles. Have you been testing your ideas? Have you been talking about this with other friends who may be on the more progressive side? And have you orange pilled some? I've orange pilled a few people close to me. Working on others, it's kind of an ongoing process that you just do person to person. I'm very lucky because my wife and I are totally on board together. Who was first?
I was first.
Uh-huh.
She was not too far behind me though, and so that's great. So we discuss it. We get to discuss it all the time.
And there's no point she's like, okay, shut up about Bitcoin now.
She is a great human being. So if she thinks that, which I'm sure that she does, at certain points, she doesn't verbalize it.
What does she think of you flying out here to do a Bitcoin interview?
She thought it was incredible. She was very, very supportive. And so she's a fan of your show as well.
Well, next time we're out there, we'll try and meet up with her. Yeah. But so testing with some of your friends.
Yeah, some, I think Jason Mayer was talking about this a little bit. I mean, it's for some of my friends, it's challenging with the environmental piece.
Yeah.
And I think it's challenging because that's just a longer conversation, and it's a more nuanced conversation that is required to convey the ways in which Bitcoin is potentially actually quite useful for addressing issues with the climate. It's not one of those. There's not kind of a pithy way to convey that. You kind of have to sit down with them, over a drink or a meal or something, and say, I need an hour of your time, probably, to maybe I'm just to talk more than others, but it takes a while to kind of get into the details of that.
Yeah. The climate one is particularly tricky for a couple of reasons, because there are other cryptocurrencies and that are actively using this to kind of win favor with people, which is particularly challenging. I also think there's been some self-owns on the climate side of things where people haven't properly thought through some ideas, we had Alex Epstein on the show, who I disagree with on a huge amount of things. But there are some important issues that he raises with regards to a consideration for human flourishing and the impact of reducing energy supplies for people. We've got, it's just in the news this week, talking about blackouts in the UK. This is an issue. We've got talks of blackouts in Germany. This is an issue. Sri Lanka is absolutely fucked. So I think there's been some cell phones that haven't particularly helped.
I would 100% agree with that. I think there hasn't been as much, despite I think some people would disagree with me here, but I don't actually think there's been a ton of space in the more progressive, or I guess the Democrat side, for trying to figure out how to walk that balance of like, it's actually a geopolitical issue. Like energy security is kind of an issue. There are a lot of geopolitical implications there. There are a lot of potentially national security implications there. And we've seen, this sort of grip that Putin has because of energy over most of Europe. It's a problem. You have like Germany sort of, because, they're not using nuclear, they're now firing up the coal plants again. And I guess there's some issues that should be talked about more in terms of, obviously we want to transition to a more renewable future. I think most people agree that, well, I guess most people probably maybe don't agree, but a lot of people would probably say, yeah, sure, eventually it's probably a net positive for us to, I'm putting this like as conservatively as I can, for us to, move to a more renewable state of things. But the transition has to be orchestrated in a way that is not, suicidal, in terms of, you don't want to introduce just massive, national security issues or grant geopolitical power to actors that are, not great people with great intentions. And, some of the, the most kind of energy rich places don't have the best, leaders who are, who care about stewarding global peace and stuff like that. So, I do think that the way that the left kind of in America talks about energy is, it's kind of pretty much like let's end all fossil fuels yesterday.
Yeah.
And, transition to renewables, 100% in 1 hour. And there are some major challenges to that. And I don't think the response is saying, oh, let's just use fossil fuels forever. But there's surely a better, more intelligent, thoughtful way to transition than what I think most of the West is kind of currently doing.
In terms of your legal work, I actually don't know your area of specialism.
Sure. So I was telling Danny before we started, right? Currently, I represent injured workers pretty exclusively. So,
okay.
So workers who get injured at work, and their companies insurance companies don't want to pay them when they're off work and don't want to pay for their medical bills. I make sure that they're able to get treatment.
Good man.
And get their lost wages until they're healed and able to go back to work.
So what are you working on now?
So I'm still working very hard on the newsletter.
But are you working on any more long form articles?
So I'm writing one now about kind of it's about Bitcoin sort of versus Web3, but not in the sense that
Hello.
Yeah, but it's not about, because I think normally the line of argument here is that, oh, everything Web3 is just a Ponzi or a scam or whatever. And I do think there's having some regulation in place to prevent people from just getting like outright scammed, I think is important. But I also think there's a balance between that and sort of just inviting Gary Gensler to come in and just sort of have his way because I don't think that's a little bit like inviting the fox into the hen house and expecting that to go well. But anyways, that's not the angle that I'm taking, that I'm writing about. But to me, one of the most compelling things about Bitcoin, and I think the thing that I love about it the most, is I think we're living in a world of sort of, Bitcoin's aim is to kind of definancialize a lot of stuff, whereas Web3, I think, is sort of, it seems like it's about kind of hyper financializing things, which again, we're back to the issue of whether you're addressing sources or symptoms of problems. Because I think most proponents of Web3 would suggest that, oh, what we're really doing is just democratizing, the ways that people can accrue value or make money. And oh, isn't that a great, wonderful thing? Because everybody gets to sort of own things in their communities, and everything is a liquid market. But it's only. I'm more interested in asking the question: Is the world that we want to live in one where we need to sort of hyper financialize every aspect of an individual's life because financial conditions on a macro level are such that you have to sort of financialize your whole being in order to keep up or get ahead? Is that truly a victory for democracy and just for the kind of psycho-spiritual well-being of all of us and the lives that we want to live, versus something like Bitcoin that is kind of a definancializing force that basically says, okay, because we think a world might be better where you're actually able to save money and you don't just have to, spend it or go invest or speculate on some stuff. Would that unlock, ways for you to feel sort of more fulfilled or satisfied as a person? Would you then be able to pursue other things? I think ultimately the end of Bitcoin is that we all think collectively less about money and more about other things that we're interested in.
Yeah.
And I think for me, which I think I don't want to sort of kind of, I guess, write the article on air here, but that's what I'm kind of fascinated by, is because I think I'm interested in Bitcoin because I'm interested in so many other things, and that I want to pursue other things. And our current economic environment is such that everybody has to be, because we can't save money, everybody has to be a full-time investor or a full-time speculator, or just spending all your money all the time, such that there's something is lost in the human experience, I think, when that is what you're forced to do. And I think the promise of Bitcoin is saying, let's sort of deflate that balloon a little bit so that we can all focus maybe on more long-term things that we're interested in, things that that we think are useful, that we would like to build or pursue. And I think the downstream effects of that shift, I think that's the societally transformative stuff.
I was going to say that, do you know what sorry to interrupt, that echoes what Anita Posch was saying the other day. So do you know Anita?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so she spends a lot of time working out in Africa, and she was explaining some of the issues that people have because of the dire state of the money system. And she said one of the biggest problems is money is all you think about, because you wake up every day and not only have you got to figure out how you can earn money so you can live and feed and survive your family, but when you've got money, you've got to spend it as quickly as possible if you're under massively high inflation, because it's going to buy you less shit at the end of the week. And she said, so it just becomes this thing. That's all you do. You think about day in, day out, money, money, money. And that does take away from the human experience. And this is why, by the way, I agree with a lot of the libertarians as well. It's like, we need to all slow down.
Yeah. And I think, and even in Western countries where, the money is, I guess, comparatively stable, and it's not, a brutal authoritarian regime. Even I think some of the, I guess, more Western maladies that afflict so many people here, I think would be addressed if we could make it so that you didn't have to think about money every second of the day. I think things like depression, belonging, boredom, fulfillment. I think about these from the perspective of somebody who I spent most of my youth wanting to be, an English professor, and talk about books and ideas and things like that. And I also think that I wonder about the implications for if we were to take steps towards, I guess, fixing the money and definancializing things, the implications for education, and the implications for art and the types of intellectual discourse that we have in the country. And if we just make everything a little bit less short-term, how would that change how we interact with each other, what we talk about, what we value and care about, and would that then trickle up instead of down, trickle up into policymakers? And that might be a way of almost reverse engineering or kind of backdooring a world where more sort of human fulfillment, more aggregate human fulfillment is possible.
I like it.
I might be overly optimistic, but that's kind of where my head's at.
It's that time preference thing.
It is. And I think it's kind of hard to I really think if you sit and think about the time preference thing, I think it's hard to overstate the implications of adjusting that down.
Yeah. I'm aware of it more than I've allowed it to actually change my life. It has to some extent. I don't work the hours I used to work. And I certainly, if I do, I work on what I want to work on. And I've definitely seen it. I could do a better job. I'm on a journey.
Yeah, no, and we all are.
But I definitely appreciate that idea of consideration of time itself anyway.
Yeah, totally. So I'm writing about that. I have a lot to say about that. And then I'm also trying to, it's kind of occurred to me, some different sort of, there are some educational holes and sort of different demographics that we could be educating about Bitcoin. So I'm also working on, creating some things for some, different groups of people who I think would benefit from knowing more about Bitcoin, but largely just trying to take this whole Think Bitcoin thing more full time and trying to work myself into the space on a.
I was just trying to say that.
Basis.
Do you know what? One of the this isn't related to you, but one of the things that we take pleasure in is, and we also feel a sense of responsibility, is that we can help people with their desire to work in Bitcoin. So Troy Cross, who's been on the show, and
I love Troy.
Yeah, we love Troy, and just seeing like what's happened with his life and career has been amazing. And
has he left teaching yet?
I don't know.
He's taking a year out.
I think he's taking some time. Yeah,
was he? Yeah, a sabbatical of some kind. But when Jason reached out to us, like he just had this idea for a book, and he had like 30 followers on Twitter. But he wrote me a really great email. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure he sent me his folder structure when he was working. I was like, well, this book's needed. This is great. Tell you what, why don't you come on the show? And he was like a bit nervous. I said, just come on the show. We were in Miami, so we flew him down and spent some time with him, and he was great. Now he's got, his book's funded. He's got all these followers on Twitter, and like there may be a chance that he transitions out of teaching, which I kind of hope not, because I think he likes it, but he might and do this full time. And
I'm sure he's a great teacher too.
Yeah, but that was the thing I was saying to you. Like I kind of like got this sense from you as this interview went on that actually, like, are you feeling that pull just to want to work on Bitcoin full time?
I am absolutely feeling that pull. Yeah, totally. I think it really aligns so many of the things that I feel like I've been passionate about for most of my adult life. Just some of the, obviously I think I've always felt somewhat vocationally like a teacher. That was probably, one of my most satisfying jobs I ever had was teaching high school. And also
why did you stop?
I mean, that's a really, probably take us a while to answer that question, Pete. Right, so okay. It's
do over a whiskey though.
So yeah, we can talk later over some beers about it. But yeah, then these sort of issues that we're kind of just touching on, like, I think the ways that, the books that I was most passionate about kind of in my own educational background, we're talking about, things like human happiness and fulfillment, and sort of how do you find meaning as, an impermanent, creature in a, how do you find something permanent and meaningful in this world of impermanence, and kind of asking those sort of deep philosophical questions. This is why I like listening to Troy talk, obviously, somebody with a philosophical background like that. But yeah, I think, I consider myself a pretty interdisciplinary person too. I like how a lot of different fields of inquiry kind of interact, and Bitcoin is probably the most interdisciplinary thing I've come across, which is endlessly, exhilarating from that perspective. But I also just think there's so much work to be done on the education front that, certainly hoping to maybe use that, maybe combine my legal skills and move to this. But I think, so many of us, I think, I know a bunch of people also who are kind of feeling the pull. You start to feel it, then you start to really feel it. Because now I feel like a person split down the middle right now. I think there's probably a tipping point where you just, you can't you can't like you can't exist as kind of two entirely discrete humans within one. So I'm probably approaching that. and approaching it more quickly than I initially thought that I would. This has been an incredible journey so far. I mean, a year ago, if you told me I'd be talking to you, I'm not sure if I would have believed that the journey would have been that quick. But it's been fantastic.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Danny said to me, he said, you're going to love Logan. And I really enjoyed your piece on, I said on Bernie, I'm going to put it there. I think I share a lot of kind of ideas with you. And I think a lot of the ways I'm imagining what Bitcoin can do with democracy is very similar. So it's been great to talk to you, and absolutely loved having you here. I'm going to take you now for your first game of football.
Cannot wait.
3 points, please. Fingers crossed. Tell people where to go to find out more. Check out Think Bitcoin. Where do they go, man?
Sure. So Think Bitcoin is my Substack newsletter. It's at thinkbitcoin.substack.com. It's free. So if you subscribe, you will receive essays from me and some other stuff. I'm on Twitter pretty regularly. My handle is at the Y of Phi. That's F-I at the end. So
what's the background to that?
Oh man, that's I kind of came to Bitcoin from a more, I guess, personal finance type of background. So, and that's kind of a financial independence background, and I've sort of turned on that community somewhat epically. But the that's a whole nother can of worms. But the handle has remained. So that's the handle under which all of my Bitcoin stuff has happened. So it
right. Well, we've got a couple of topics for the next time we do this. Okay, man. Listen, thanks for coming in. This was an absolute pleasure. Please do go and check out Logan. I hope we do this again, man. It was amazing. And yeah, let's go watch some football. You ready, Danny?
I'm ready.
Let's go, man.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Pete.